Welcome to Newcastle Family History Society podcast. The Newcastle Family History Society, located on Awabakal land in Newcastle, New South Wales, Australia, provides support for those interested in family history. And welcome to another offering in our series, Notable Novocastrians. In this episode, Two Iconic Women of Newcastle, Dr. Jude Conway brings to life the stories of two extraordinary Newcastle women whose talents, generosity and community spirit left a lasting mark on the city they loved. From the surf and sands of Merewether to the concert halls and radio studios of Newcastle, meet Alice Feguson and Hazel Evans, two women born in the same year, educated at the same school and remembered as icons of their era. Alice Feguson taught generations of Novocastrians to swim, rescued lives in the surf, and became a beloved figure of Merewether bars for more than half a century. Hazel Evans filled Newcastle with music, accompanying singers, choirs, charities and radio broadcasts with warmth, humour and extraordinary skill. Their stories are woven through the beaches, theatres, halls and community life of Newcastle in the 20th century. Stories of service, creativity, resilience and joy.
Alice Feguson was an iconic figure in the Newcastle suburb of Merewether for many decades in the 20th century. She was so well known that a letter addressed to Alice, Merewether Beach, reached her in 1950, and her fame grew in the following decades. She was born Alice Sawyer in Burner Street, Merewether in 1909, 2 streets away from the beach. She was a change of life baby, with 2 older sisters and 1 much older brother. Her mother was Florence née Wilson, and her father was Frederick Sawyer, a landscape gardening labourer with the Newcastle City Council. The family was not well off. Alice showed talent at an early age, singing and dancing in children's shows at the Victoria Theatre from the age of 4 until she was 14, earning a very useful 10 shillings a week. She performed with the famous comedy duo Stiffy and Mo in their first ever pantomime. Alice attended the Junction Public School, where she played Vigoro for sport and performed in school concerts. Her undies fell down at one performance, but the gutsy Alice just kept on singing. She had 2 piano lessons when she was 6 years old, and from then on could play by ear. She would teach other children dancing and singing and put on concerts after school on Friday afternoons. A threepence entry helped buy a wireless and a piano for the school. When Newcastle Central School, a high school, opened in Broadmeadow in 1923, Alice transferred there. She became a prefect of her Class 2A and a member of the school council, raising money for curtains and books for the cookery cottage. On completing school, she was offered a scholarship to art school, but her mother could not afford to pay the required 6pence a week. So instead, at age 16, Alice started work at the Victoria Theatre as an usherette, eventually rising to staff manager and bookkeeper. Alice also taught piano and, on Saturday mornings, various forms of dancing. For example, she taught most of the young people around Merewether how to ballroom dance in her time. For decades, she played the piano with gusto for local dancers, including for Newcastle Technical High and Home Science Girls High. Alice was involved in many theatrical productions. She was the first ballet mistress for Colin Chapman's Newcastle Dramatic Art Club productions and for the Civic Choral Society in the 1940s. She was choreographer and musical director for an all-male showgirl revue in the 1950s and a vice patron of the Independent Theatre Company in the 1960s. Alongside theatre, Alice's main passion was the beach. From an early age, she would go with her brother, a lifesaver, to Merewether Beach. She was his shadow. He and his mates taught Alice to shoot the breakers. She recalled, When I was 16, I got a beautiful chute and rode it all the way in. Unfortunately, however, with her head down and kicking strenuously, she crashed straight into what she described as a police sergeant's fat stomach. Her front teeth were knocked out and other teeth chipped. In those days, there was no fixing them, so I had to get them all out, and then I got false teeth, she said. I was never sorry. It was worth it. What a shoot that was. When she was 17, about 1926, Alice and a friend spotted a shark clenched onto the buttocks of a local man named Teddy Pritchard. They raced into the surf and dragged him onto the sand before the shark finally let go. The ambulance was called. The paramedics were worried Teddy would not last the night, but Teddy did survive, and to help with the costs of his recovery, Alice organised a concert at the Victoria Theatre, which raised £88, a reasonable amount of money in those days, worth over $8,000 in the 2020s. In the late 1920s, Alice was a founding member of the Merewether Ladies Swimming Club. She was elected captain and remained captain for nearly 60 years. Their swimming costumes were heavy, made out of blue wool with bands of cream and orange around the bottom. The women wore a belt to give them better shape. The swimming club held their races in the ladies' baths, carved into the rock platform at Merewether Beach. Alice was a good swimmer and would often win trophies. She could dive so powerfully, she was nearly to the other end before she started stroking. A member of Lost Newcastle on Facebook recalled that Alice was the only person she ever saw who made a perfect entrance into the water. Absolutely no splash at all. Poetry in motion. Although they are now silted up, the ladies' baths are still there, and the rock platform is still known locally as the Ladies. Alice helped raise funds to construct the Merewether Ladies Clubhouse on the promenade, which had showers and lockers and a meeting room. She bought an old piano for the clubhouse, which she would play for sing-alongs. On one day of high seas, while Alice was shooting the waves, she saw the piano floating in the surf. With help, she pulled it out of the water and organised a truck to take it to her garage. The piano was never the same. It croaked from then on. Eventually, the clubhouse was also washed away. From her teens, Alice had started giving swimming lessons to children every day in summer. At first, she taught in a deep hole near the sewage pipe south of Merewether Beach. Then, after it was built in 1926, she held her lessons in the ladies' baths, before finding a permanent home at the Merewether Ocean Baths when they were completed in 1935. Alice was the first to dive into the new baths at the official opening ceremony. She taught babies to swim by holding a hand under their stomach, singing The Wizard of Oz, and moving their tiny arms to the music. If the children were scared, she asked them what pets their family had to relax them. She conducted free lessons for decades. Alice lived in the time before slip, slop, slap and never used sunscreen. So her black as the ace of spades body was a very recognisable figure at the ocean baths every summer, and I am just one of many who remember seeing her there. As another Lost Newcastle patron recalled, with Alice there was always the big smile, the gravelly voice, and you felt at home. Alice Sawyer married Alan Feguson in 1937 after meeting him at Merewether Beach, of course. She gave up her work at the theatre, as was expected in those days, although continued all her classes. She and Alan moved to Coan Street, just one street away from her parents' home. Alice Annie gave up competitive swimming at the age of 35, possibly when she was pregnant. They had one child, a son named Ken, in 1945. In the Second World War, because so many men had gone away to fight, the Merewether lady swimmers were asked to learn how to operate the line, reel and belt in order to do patrol duties as lifesavers in emergencies. Using her new skills, Alice then helped the Cooks Hill Women's Surf Club with their life-saving practice. She is listed in the book A Sporting Nation, celebrating Australia's sporting life, as an early female lifesaver. Her husband Alan died too young in 1948. Although she had a number of offers, she never remarried. She devoted her life to swimming and concerts, always coming up with innovative ideas. For example, realising that many of the mothers who brought their children to learn to swim could not swim themselves, Alice formed the Mothers Swimming Club in the late 1950s. Between 20 to 40 women would attend the monthly sessions, which ran till at least the mid-1980s. In 1962, Alice was awarded an MBE, Member of the British Empire, for her services to swimming and the community. And in 1984, she was named Newcastle's Sportsperson of the Year for teaching swimming to thousands of babies, children and adults, including immigrants and the intellectually and physically disabled. Her youngest student had been 8 months old and the oldest 89. In 1973, Alice Feguson became the first woman ever in Newcastle to be appointed an honorary beach inspector, at Merewether Beach, of course. Alice made 2 rescues in her later years. One woman in trouble in the water just off the rock platform was so scared her arms were flying everywhere. Alice had to knock her out by punching her on the chin in order to bring her to shore. Then, when Alice was 75, she saw a Japanese student caught in a rip and realised she's going to be taken out to Billy-O. Alice had to swim 500 metres to reach her. The student, in her fear, kicked her and screamed and shouted. Alice just had to pull her in on her back the best she could. When they got to shore, Alice said the student put her little hands together and thanked her. Alice Feguson passed away in 1997, but her iconic status continues. The Alice Feguson Community Centre in Corwell Street, Merewether, on the site of the former Carlton Tennis Club, of which Alice was a member, was named in her honour. And her birth name, Alice Sawyer, is etched in concrete alongside Merewether Surf House. All respect to Merewether's Alice Feguson. And now I'd like to tell you about another Newcastle icon from that era, Hazel Evans. They were born in the same year, attended the same high school, and were both performers. Hazel Melba Evans was one of Newcastle's most accomplished and respected pianists, and is a resonant example of the Welsh musical influence in the city. She lived for most of her life in Dawson Street, Cooks Hill, in a house named Morlaes, meaning Great River in Welsh, and the name of a 13th century castle above the Taff River Gorge in Wales. The first non-convict Welsh to arrive in Newcastle were coal miners brought over by the Australian Agricultural Company in 1840. Many more Welsh miners were assisted to emigrate, and by the 1870s there were 7 Welsh chapels in town. At the turn of the century, the Welsh were 6 times more common in Newcastle than in the rest of New South Wales, and Welsh music competitions, Eisteddfods, had been staged for decades, commencing even before Sydney. Hazel's father, David Evans, a violinist, was born in Newcastle, though his ubiquitous Welsh name indicates his origins. Her mother, Margaret, born in Carmarthenshire, Wales, had arrived in Newcastle at the age of 17. Margaret had a beautiful singing voice and was known at Sydney Eisteddfods as the Welsh Nightingale, winning many medals. Hazel was their 3rd child, born in 1909. Unsurprisingly, all 3 Evans children became musicians. While attending Cooks Hill Primary School, Hazel, aged 8, commenced piano lessons with Miss Millie Wise in Derby Street. She continued studying piano zealously while attending Newcastle Central School, and by age 15 had been awarded an Associate London College of Music degree with honours. Hazel's first publicised performance was at age 11, singing at the celebration of St David's Day, honouring the patron saint of Wales, which was held by the Newcastle and District Cambrian Society in the Central Methodist Mission Hall. The Newcastle Morning Herald reported that the Welsh spirit of song pervaded the evening. But Hazel's speciality was the piano, and from when she was 10 years old, she played in a small orchestra with her two brothers and a friend. Her brother Bill, 10 years older, played the violin and went on to conduct an orchestra of students from the Technical College at Tice Hill. And her other brother, Alwyn, 7 years her senior, was a cornet player who played the bugle at Anzac ceremonies. Music must have flowed from Morlace at all waking hours. Performing sheet music for prospective customers in Nicholson's music store, later Palings in Hunter Street, Newcastle, was Hazel's first paid job. She moved on to Wynn's department store shortly before the Second World War, organising and playing in radio matinee concerts that were broadcast throughout the Hunter Valley. Also, for a Wynn's staff review, Hazel conducted the orchestra and Alice Feguson was the ballet mistress. During the war, the Song of Newcastle, composed by Alexander Galloway, was issued as a 78 RPM record, with all profits donated to the Newcastle Patriotic and War Funds. It was sung by baritone Edward Walcott, and although unnamed on the record, the pianist was Hazel Evans. You can listen online to this paean to our well-endowed by nature city. Every Sunday afternoon, from 1942 to 1945, Hazel played in Concerts for the People to raise money for the Australian Comforts Fund for the Armed Services. Besides Hazel, comedian Bobby LeBrun and his fellow entertainers from the Barton's Follies tent show, trapped in Newcastle by wartime fuel restrictions, together with other local artists, ensured lively, well-patronised concerts. Hazel also performed at servicemen's camps from Singleton to Gangan at Port Stephens. One night after heavy rain, she was playing the piano in a tent when it suddenly capsized, drenching her and the piano with rainwater. Hazel blithely changed her clothes and went on with the show. What a trooper. In 1946, nominated as Miss Retail by Wynn's for the Legacy Queen competition, Hazel and her co-workers got cracking on a non-stop round of parties, socials, musicals and other functions to raise the impressive sum of £5,764. She even helped other candidates by playing at their functions, but no one topped her fundraising effort. The culmination was her crowning as Newcastle's Queen of Legacy. So popular were Welsh music festivals, in 1947, 500 people had to stand in the corridor outside a packed City Hall concert room where, the Herald declared, the natural ability of the Welsh people to harmonise was heard when the audience joined in the Welsh national anthem. Hazel would have been delighted in being one of the accompanists. As well as playing for Welsh celebrations, she played for the Irish on St Patrick's Day and in most of the churches around town, Baptist, Anglican, Congregational and Methodist. The name Hazel Evans was becoming familiar to those who attended concerts, musicals, Stedfords, choral societies and anywhere else where music was heard. She even played for the prisoners in Maitland Jail. Hazel moved from Wynn's to radio station 2KO in 1948, working in the programming department and as accompanist for their broadcasting artists, and stayed there until her retirement in 1974. One of the artists she accompanied was Gladys Moncrief, Australia's Queen of Song, who in 1951 sang a riot of songs at the Newcastle City Hall, arousing a packed house to unusual scenes of enthusiasm. Before the final curtain, Gladys called Hazel Evans from the piano and gave her a hearty kiss. It was a lovely gesture from a great artist to an accompanist whose work could not be faulted. Hazel was chuffed that Gladys affectionately called her my Newcastle accompanist. Many older Novocastrians still remember as a child hearing Auntie Hazel play the piano at the Victor Ice Cream Show in the sadly recently demolished Blackhall House in New Common Street, held every Friday after school and broadcast live on 2KO. Julian Croft, a born and bred Novocastrian poet, immortalised her in a 1983 poem, Caveat Emptor. This is the Victor Ice Cream Show. We're on the air from 2KO. Okay, I ate my ice cream, so cold it broke the spoons. Sat in stunned silence at Uncle Rex's jokes and sang along with Auntie Hazel's transparent tunes. In order to keep up with all the new numbers, Hazel's transparent tunes emerged from the thousands of sheets of music she kept at Morlaix. In fact, a fellow musical colleague, singer Pat Wilson, recalled on Lost Newcastle that Hazel's music room was so full to the brim with scores that the piano was hard to find. As an adult, Hazel attended the Newcastle Conservatorium for weekly lessons with the well-known Sydney teacher and composer Frank Hutchins for about 8 years. She found that the study of classical music helped her finger dexterity. In 1962, she mentioned to Hutchins that she needed a short piece to play for the Lady Mayoress's at-home function. At the following week's lesson, he handed Hazel a lullaby, which he had just completed and autographed. Hazel went on to play his Lullaby to a Boy at hundreds of weddings, charitable functions and musicals. She said whenever she played it, you could hear a pin drop. Almost everybody knew her. Oh, look, there's Hazel. No one called her Miss Evans. Was a standard remark at wedding breakfasts, charity luncheons and club functions. She gave her services free to the Cambrian Society, Wattle Day League, Royal Newcastle Hospital, Red Cross, Legacy and Rotary. She travelled long distances to accompany students at Eisteddfods. She accompanied choirs and played in orchestras, performed in drawing rooms, theatres, town halls, reception halls, clubs, broadcast studios, hospitals and other institutions. She even did a stint for silent movies. When Hazel's mother, Margaret, the Welsh Nightingale, had died in 1944, the minister at her funeral spoke of Margaret's talent, which, he said, she used for the help of others and never for monetary considerations. Like mother, like daughter. A journalist wanting to interview Hazel wrote, "She would be one of the most elusive women in Newcastle. You see her here, you see her there, but you rarely find her at home. But wherever she is, you can be sure of one thing. She'll be playing a piano." Hazel was familiar with just about every public piano in the Newcastle district, including those off-key and off-colour. But no matter how out of tune, she could patch up the music. She was that rare commodity, an absolutely reliable accompanist. She had learned singing, mainly to understand singers' needs. They were all happy to perform when they knew she would accompany them. One bad experience, though, was accompanying an elderly woman singing the lost chord. By the time the vocalist had finished, they were way down in the basement, and Hazel was a nervous wreck because she had to transpose the song as the woman could not hit the high notes. In contrast, violinist Errol Collins recounted with admiration how, after performing a piece called Gypsy Dance with Hazel at the City Hall, she told him that the last page of her music was missing, so she'd just made it up. He had no idea. Hazel had a jolliness and bright, shining humour and was always ready for a laugh. And in 1968, the local branch of the Women's Service Club, Quota, chose her as their Woman of the Year for untiring service to the city of Newcastle and her cheerful and Christian attitude. On a grander scale, in 1978, Hazel Evans was awarded the BEM, the British Empire Medal, for meritorious service to the community. On the 10th of December 1981, after doing what you can be sure of, that is playing the piano, at Newcastle Women's Bowling Club, Hazel collapsed, later dying in hospital, aged 72. By then, the ever-generous Hazel Evans, of musical Welsh ancestry, was deemed to have performed in Newcastle so often that her name was better known than Nobby's. Vale Hazel Evans.
You've been listening to Two Iconic Women of Newcastle, written and presented by Dr. Jude Conway. Through the lives of Alice Feguson and Hazel Evans, we glimpse a Newcastle shaped not only by industry and change, but by people whose generosity, talent and dedication enriched the lives of thousands. Whether teaching children to swim at Merriweather Baths, accompanying performers across the city, raising funds for wartime causes, or simply bringing people together through music and community, these women became part of Newcastle's living memory, and their legacy still echoes through the city today. To hear more stories in this series, please visit the podcast section of our website, www.nfhs.org.au, or search Notable Novocastrians in your chosen podcast listening platform. This has been Newcastle Family History Society Podcasts.